The polyester of her uniform chafed the back of Nia's neck. It was a constant, itchy reminder of where she was. Jinsei, a restaurant in Shinjuku where the air cost more than her monthly rent, and she was just part of the machinery. Her feet ached, a low thrumming that had become the baseline of her existence for the past 6 months. She moved through the private dining room, a ghost in black and white, her movements economical and silent.
She was good at her job.
Good at being invisible. The room was hushed, the only sounds the clink of silver on porcelain and the low murmur of men who did not need to raise their voices to be heard. At the head of the long, dark wood table sat a man who was the center of the room's gravity. He hadn't spoken more than 3 words all evening, yet every other man in the room was an orbiting planet, their postures angled toward him, their attention tethered to his stillness. Nia knew who he was. Everyone who worked at Jinsei knew. Kaito Ishikawa. The name was a whisper in the kitchens, a knot of fear and respect. His empire was not one of stocks and bonds, but of shadow and steel. She had only seen him in person once before, but she remembered the details. The suit was a Tom Ford, charcoal gray, tailored so precisely it looked less like clothing and more like a second skin. And his hands. They rested on the table, one on either side of a pristine, untouched glass of water. They were elegant, long-fingered, but the ink that coiled just beyond the starched white cuff of his shirt hinted at something else entirely. A detailed, monochromatic serpent disappeared up his sleeve, its scales rendered with surgical precision. Tonight, the tension in the room was a physical thing. It was thicker than the expensive cigar smoke, colder than the air conditioning. Nia's focus was on her task: clear the appetizer plates, refill the wine, remain unnoticed. As she reached for a plate near the far end of the table, she saw it. A man named Ryota, one of Ishikawa's most trusted lieutenants, was speaking. But his eyes were not on his boss. They were fixed on the untouched water glass. His own hand, holding a sake cup, trembled almost imperceptibly. A single, tiny tremor. Nia's breath hitched. Her survival instinct, honed by years of navigating a world that was not always kind, screamed at her. It was the details that mattered. The slight sheen of sweat on Ryota's temple. The way his gaze darted to the glass, then away, then back again. It was wrong. All of it. She continued her circuit of the table, her heart a frantic bird against her ribs. Her tray was heavy with dirty dishes. In her mind, a plan formed, desperate and insane. It was not her business. She was a waitress. An 18-year-old girl a world away from home, trying to scrape together enough yen to send back to her mother and keep a roof over her head. Getting involved was a death sentence, but letting it happen felt like 1, 2. Her conscience was a stubborn, inconvenient thing. She approached the head of the table. Kaito Ishikawa's eyes were on the man speaking, his expression a mask of cold neutrality. He seemed to notice nothing. But Nia knew that was an illusion. Men like him noticed everything. This was her chance. Her one, terrifying chance. She reached for the empty bread plate beside his water glass. And then, in a movement that was both clumsy and deliberate, she let her hip knock against the corner of the small serving stand beside her. The stand wobbled. A spare water carafe and a clean glass, placed there for refills, tilted precariously. "My apologies," she murmured, her voice a soft note of embarrassment in the tense room. As she reached out to steady the stand, her other hand, holding her tray, moved with practiced speed. It was a dance she did 100 times a night.
Clear, stack, replace.
Her left hand swept up Ishikawa's full water glass. Her right, in the same fluid motion, plucked the clean, empty glass from the wobbling stand and set it down exactly where the other had been. The entire exchange took less than a second. A sleight of hand born of exhaustion and repetition. She placed the poisoned glass among the dirty dishes on her tray, its rim now touching a half-eaten piece of fish. Contaminated. Useless. She straightened up, her face a carefully constructed mask of professional apology. So sorry for the disturbance. For the first time that night, Kaito Ishikawa looked at her. His eyes were not black, as she'd imagined, but a deep, dark brown, so dark they absorbed the light in the room. They held no anger.
No surprise.
Only a piercing, unnerving stillness. He saw her. Not the uniform, not the waitress, but her. The silence in the room stretched, becoming thin and sharp. He held her gaze for a beat too long, a silent transaction passing between them that she could not decipher, but felt in her bones. Then, he gave a minuscule nod, a gesture so slight it was barely a movement at all, and turned his attention back to his men. The conversation resumed. The moment was over. Nia's legs felt like water. She turned, walked out of the private dining room, and did not look back. She pushed through the swinging doors into the hot, clamorous kitchen, the clatter of pans and shouting of chefs a welcome assault. She dumped her tray at the dishwashing station, the glass of water splashing onto the pile of discarded food. It was gone. She finished her shift in a daze, her body on autopilot while her mind replayed that single second, that silent look, over and over again. It was foolish. It was reckless. He would never know. He would think it was just a clumsy waitress. She told herself that all the way through her checkout, all the way down the service elevator, and all the way out the back alley exit. The cool night air of Shinjuku hit her face, smelling of rain and ramen. Freedom. She had survived. She took 2 steps toward the main street, toward the train station and her tiny apartment. A car door opened beside her, a slab of black so polished it reflected the neon signs in distorted ribbons. The sound was soft, expensive. "Get in, waitress." The voice was low, calm, and absolute. It was not a request. Nia froze, her blood turning to ice. She didn't have to look to know who it was. Kaito Ishikawa sat in the back of the sedan, a silhouette against the city lights. The moment in the dining room had not been the end. It was the beginning. Her heart hammered against her ribs, no longer a frantic bird, but a trapped thing beating against the bars of a cage. She had made a choice, and now the consequences had come to collect. The car was an island of absolute silence in the noisy heart of Tokyo. The leather seats were cool against Nia's skin, the scent of the interior a mix of sandalwood and something clean, like rain on stone. It was his cologne. She sat perfectly still, her hands clenched in the lap of her worn coat, her gaze fixed on the back of the driver's head. She did not look at the man beside her. Looking at him felt like leaning over the edge of a cliff. He did not speak for several long minutes, simply watching the neon-drenched streets slide by. The city was a river of light, but inside the car, there was only shadow. "Ryota is dead," he said finally. His voice was flat, a statement of fact, not a confession. Nia flinched, a small, involuntary jerk of her shoulders. She kept her eyes forward. "He was my second-in-command for 10 years. I considered him a brother." The words were delivered without emotion, but Nia could feel the weight behind them, the cold, hard mass of betrayal. The poison was aconite, tasteless, odorless.
Fast.
"You would have been clearing my dead body from the table instead of a water glass." She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I didn't. I just saw." "You saw his hand tremble," Kaito finished for her, his voice still unnervingly calm. "You saw him watch the glass. You saw what 6 of my most highly trained men whose only job is to see such things, missed entirely." He finally turned his head, and she felt the intensity of his gaze on her profile.
Why?
It was the question she had been dreading. Why had she, a nobody, interfered in the affairs of gods and monsters? "I don't know," she whispered, the words feeling thin and inadequate. It was just a feeling. Something was wrong. "A feeling," he repeated, the words laced with a faint, unreadable inflection. "You risked your life on a feeling." "I work hard for my money," she said, a spark of defiance cutting through her fear. "I needed to finish my shift." A dead body in the middle of the dining room would have made that difficult. It was a lie, a flimsy shield, but it was all she had. A low sound, not quite a laugh, escaped him. It was a dry, rustling noise, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. An admirable work ethic, the car turned, leaving the main thoroughfare and ascending a quiet, tree-lined hill in a wealthy residential district. It pulled into a private underground garage and glided to a stop before a steel door. "You are a terrible liar, Nia." He said her name. Not Waitress.
Not you. Nia.
He must have gotten it from her employee file. But the way he said it was different. It landed on her skin, precise and proprietary. It was the first sign. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "My home," he answered, as the driver opened his door. "You are a loose end. A witness. By every rule of my world, you should already be a memory." He stepped out of the car, then looked back at her, his face half in shadow. "But you are also the only person in this city I know for a fact is not trying to kill me. That makes you a temporary asset." He led her not to a house, but to a private elevator that opened directly into a sprawling penthouse apartment. The walls were glass, offering a breathtaking, panoramic view of Tokyo. The city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The furniture was minimalist, black and white and chrome, beautiful and cold. It was a fortress, not a home. "You will stay here," he said, his back to her as he loosened his tie. "You will be safe. You will be compensated for your inconvenience." "I can't just disappear," she protested, finding her footing in this surreal new reality. "I have a job, an apartment. My mother. Your rent has been paid for the next year. A story has been arranged for your employer, a family emergency requiring you to return home. Your mother will receive a wire transfer that will ensure she wants for nothing." He turned, his dark eyes pinning her in place. These are trivialities. The casual, absolute power in his words stole her breath. He had rearranged her entire life in the space of a car ride. She was a pawn he had plucked from the board, and her old life was already a distant memory. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but something else was beginning to curdle with it. Anger. "You can't just do that," she said, her voice low. "I can," he replied, without arrogance, simply stating a fact. "And I have." The days that followed were a study in luxurious captivity. She had a room with a bed softer than a cloud and a view that most people only dreamed of. She was given clothes, expensive silks and cashmeres that felt alien against her skin. A silent, older woman brought her meals on a tray. But the doors were locked. The elevator required a code. She was a bird in a very gilded cage. Kaito was a phantom. He would be gone when she woke, and would return late at night, a wraith of smoke and steel. Sometimes she would hear him on the phone, his voice a low, lethal murmur in Japanese. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was the sound of an empire at war with itself. The betrayal ran deep. One evening, a week into her confinement, the silence of the penthouse was shattered. A sudden, explosive crash from the main living area. Glass sprayed. Nia's heart leaped into her throat. She scrambled from her bed, pressing her ear to the door.
Shouts.
The heavy, concussive boom of gunfire. Her first instinct was to hide, to crawl under the bed and pray. But then she heard a sound that chilled her to the bone. A grunt of pain. Kaito's. She did something she could not explain, even to herself. She didn't hide. She unlocked her door. It had been left unlocked in the chaos, and crept into the hallway. The living room was a scene of controlled destruction. Two men in black suits lay on the floor, unnervingly still. The floor-to-ceiling window was a spiderweb of fractured glass. Kaito stood in the center of the room, a pistol in his hand, his posture radiating deadly calm. Another man, a stranger, was slumped against the far wall. Kaito moved through the violence like it was choreography he had known his whole life.
Precise.
Economical. Never a wasted motion. He was checking the bodies when he seemed to notice her for the first time, a ghost in a borrowed silk robe. His eyes narrowed. "Get back in your room." But she couldn't. Her gaze was fixed on his left arm. A deep gash ran from his elbow to his wrist, carved through the fine fabric of his shirt. Dark, rich blood dripped steadily onto the pristine white marble floor. He was ignoring it, his focus absolute, but the wound was serious. In the distance, sirens began to wail, a faint cry that was growing closer. Kaido swore under his breath, a sharp, guttural sound. He moved to a panel on the wall, his fingers flying across a keypad. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a hidden exit. "We have to go," he said, his voice tight. He looked at her, his jaw clenched. He could leave her. It would be the smart thing to do. The sirens were getting louder. But he didn't. He strode toward her, grabbed her arm, and pulled her toward the hidden passage. "Stay close." His body shielded hers as they descended a narrow, sterile staircase. The proximity was overwhelming. She could feel the heat of him, smell the cordite and his cologne, feel the wetness of his blood seeping through his shirt where his arm brushed against her. The danger was a live wire between them. They emerged in another private garage, into another black car that was already running. They sped away into the night, leaving the sirens and the chaos behind. They drove for what felt like hours, into the mountains outside the city, to a traditional house nestled in a forest of bamboo, shrouded in mist. A safe house. Inside, it was Spartan but clean. He slumped into a chair, the adrenaline finally leaving him. His face was pale beneath his tan, his breathing harsh. The bleeding from his arm had not stopped. His men were gone. The traitors had cut deep. They were alone. Nia looked at the wound, then at his face. She could have run in the chaos at the penthouse. She could run now, melt into the forest. He was injured, weakened. It was her best chance for freedom. But she didn't move. She looked at the man who had stolen her life, who held her captive, who had just saved her from a hail of bullets. She saw the vulnerability beneath the cold, tactical mind. She saw the blood. "Where is your first aid kit?" she asked, her voice steady. He stared at her, his dark eyes searching her face. He saw her choice. He saw her stay, when she could have fled. He gave a curt nod toward a cabinet. She found the kit. Antiseptic, bandages, and a suture kit. Her hands, which had trembled when she switched the water glass, were now perfectly still. She had never stitched a person before, but she had watched her mother, a nurse, do it a dozen times. She knelt before him. "This is going to hurt," she said, meeting his gaze. "I'm aware," he rasped. As she cleaned the wound, her touch gentle but firm, he watched her. His usual mask of control had slipped, fractured by pain and exhaustion. "My sister, Akemi," he said, his voice low and rough. The sound was so unexpected it made Nia pause. "She was killed. Years ago. A rival clan took her, because I was careless. I was young, arrogant. I brought her into my world, and it devoured her." He looked away, his gaze fixed on the dark wood of the floor. "I failed to protect her. It is a shame I will carry forever." That was his wound. The one vulnerability he carried, buried deep beneath the ink and the tailored suits. He was sharing it with her. Nia didn't offer platitudes or comfort. She simply picked up the needle. As she pushed the needle through his skin for the first stitch, he inhaled sharply, but did not make another sound. His eyes were closed. In that moment, he was not a monster. He was just a man, bleeding in a quiet room, trusting the steady hands of a girl who should have been his victim. The silence between them was not empty. It was charged, heavy with unspoken things. This, she realized, was a different kind of intimacy, one forged in danger and paid for in blood. The mountains were a cage of quiet beauty. For days, they were utterly alone in the safe house, a world away from the war raging in Tokyo's underworld. The betrayal within Kaido's clan was a cancer, and he was cutting it out, piece by piece, through a series of terse, coded phone calls. He moved with a predator's patience, a grim certainty that was terrifying to witness. Nia became his keeper. She changed his bandages, cooked simple meals with the supplies in the pantry, and kept watch while he slept. The sleep was rare and fitful, haunted by nightmares that made him flinch and call out a name she recognized. Akemi. In those moments, the formidable boss of the Ishikawagumi vanished, replaced by a man drowning in a past he could not escape. One afternoon, as she was replacing the dressing on his arm, her fingers brushed against the uninjured part of his skin. The contact was brief, professional, but it sent a jolt through her. His skin was warm. He was real. Her breath caught. He opened his eyes, and they were no longer clouded with pain or memory, but sharp and focused on her. On her face. On her mouth. The air grew thick, the silence stretching between them. He was so close she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the slight stubble along his jaw. He lifted his good hand, slowly, as if testing its weight. His fingers hovered near her cheek, not quite touching. It was a moment of profound hesitation from a man who never hesitated. That was when she made the mistake of looking up, meeting his gaze fully. She saw a flicker of something in their dark depths, something raw and unguarded that mirrored the frantic beating of her own heart. She told herself it was survival instinct.
Proximity.
A shared trauma. But her body knew it was a lie. The spell was broken by the sharp ring of his satellite phone. He blinked, and the mask of control slammed back into place. The moment was gone, leaving an echo of tension in the air that was more dangerous than any gunshot. The call was bad. She could tell by the way his posture stiffened, the way his voice dropped to a lethal whisper. When he hung up, his face was carved from stone. "They know about you," he said, his voice flat. "What?" "My rival. Tanaka. The man behind the betrayal. He's been digging.
He knows I have a woman with me.
He thinks you are my leverage. My new weakness." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something that looked like fear in his eyes. Not for himself. For her. A plan was made. One of his few remaining loyal men would meet them, take her, and get her out of the country. She would be given a new name, a new life, far from him and the danger that clung to him like a shroud. It was the sensible thing to do. It was the only way she would survive. The rendezvous was a deserted service station on a mountain pass. Night had fallen, and a cold rain was beginning to slick the asphalt. A black sedan, identical to Kaito's, pulled in. A man got out, bowed low to Kaito, then opened the back door for Nia. This was it. Freedom. She looked at Kaito. His face was a mask in the dim light.
"Go," he said.
The word was a piece of gravel in his throat. She took a step toward the car, then hesitated. Leaving felt like tearing something vital from her own chest. It made no sense. He was her captor. Her life had been ruined because of him. But the thought of never seeing him again was a physical ache. That hesitation cost them. Headlights flooded the station from both ends of the road. 2 more sedans screeched to a halt, blocking any escape. Men in dark suits poured out, guns raised. An ambush. Tanaka's men. Kaito reacted instantly, shoving Nia behind him and drawing his weapon. "Get down," he yelled, pushing her toward the relative cover of the car. The air exploded with the deafening crack of gunfire. He returned fire with calm, deadly efficiency, a whirlwind of motion in the pouring rain. Nia scrambled behind the car, her heart pounding in her ears. She was a liability, a civilian in a firefight. But as she huddled there, she saw one of Tanaka's men circling around, flanking Kaito, his gun raised. Kaito was pinned, focused on the men in front of him. He didn't see him. She didn't think. She acted. She grabbed a heavy, discarded tire iron from the ground beside a rusty bin. With a scream that was half fear, half rage, she scrambled up and threw it with all her might. It spun end over end, striking the gunman's arm. His shot went wide, shattering the gas station window. The momentary distraction was all Kaito needed. He pivoted, and 2 precise shots ended the threat. The firefight was over in seconds. Kaito stood amidst the bodies and the rain, breathing heavily. He looked at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something else she couldn't name. He had been about to lose her. The realization hung between them, stark and terrifying. He strode to her, grabbing her by the shoulders. His grip was bruising. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes scanning her frantically. "No," she whispered, shaking. He pulled her against him, a rough, desperate embrace that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with confirmation. His face was buried in her hair, and she felt a shudder rack his body. The war between them, the push and pull of captor and captive, had just been tested by fire, and something new had been forged in its place. They couldn't run. Tanaka now knew who she was, what she looked like. She was no longer a secret. She was a target. They retreated back to the penthouse in Tokyo, now a fortress bristling with new guards Kaido had called in, men whose loyalty was absolute, forged in blood oaths. The dynamic had shifted. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was a participant. She had crossed a line she could not uncross. Kaido started including her, not in his strategy meetings, but in his quiet moments of thought. He would lay out maps of the city, and she would watch, learning the territories, the allegiances, the fault lines of his empire. He needed something. A ledger. It was held by a neutral party, a wealthy industrialist who trafficked in information. It contained proof of Tanaka's dealings with foreign syndicates, a betrayal of the clan's code that would turn the last of his allies against him. The ledger was being moved during a private, high-security auction at the industrialist's estate. Kaido's men had a plan for a frontal assault, but Nia saw a flaw and an opportunity. She had studied the catering manifests for the event, a habit from her old life. "The security is focused on the guests," she said one night, pointing to a blueprint of the estate. "But the service staff, they use a different entrance, a different system. Their background noise. Invisible." She helped them devise a new plan, a plan that used her knowledge. She created a diversion, calling the head caterer with a convincing story about a last-minute allergy concern for a high-profile guest, creating chaos in the kitchen at a precise moment. It was a small act, but it was a lie, a deliberate manipulation. It was her, using the tools of his world. She was becoming something she never thought she would be. The plan worked. They got the ledger. That night, back in the silent penthouse, the tension was a humming wire. The proof he needed to destroy his enemy was in his hands, and she had helped him get it. He stood by the window, looking down at the city he ruled. "In my world," he said, his voice quiet, "observation is a weapon. Yours saved my life. Now, it makes you a target." Nia walked to stand beside him, her reflection a faint ghost next to his in the glass. The fear was still there, but it was a familiar companion now. "I told myself staying was about survival," she confessed, the words tasting like a dangerous truth on her tongue. "I was lying." He turned to face her. The space between them was electric. He didn't have to ask what she meant. He knew. He took a step closer, his hand coming up to cup her jaw. His thumb stroked her skin, a touch that was both possessive and impossibly tender. "Nia," he murmured, and her name was a claim. This was the confession, not of love, but of something far more potent and honest, a recognition of the inevitable. He leaned in, and she tilted her head up to meet him. Their lips were about to touch when his phone rang again, shrill and demanding. His eyes closed for a fraction of a second, a flicker of frustration. He answered it. His body went rigid. The warmth in his hand vanished, replaced by ice. "What do you mean she's gone?" he snarled into the phone. Nia's blood ran cold. He was talking about the older woman, the housekeeper. "Where is she?" he demanded. He listened, his face becoming a mask of pure fury. He hung up and looked at Nia, his eyes black holes of rage. "Tanaka didn't take her from here," he said, his voice deadly soft. "He took her from her own home. Her son called my man. They left something for me." He held up his phone. It was a picture, a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of silk, was a single, severed finger wearing a simple gold band. And a note. "The girl for the Empire. Your choice." The final move had been made. Tanaka had not targeted the fortress. He had targeted the heart. He had found Kaido's true weakness, and it wasn't his empire. It was her. The city held its breath. The final confrontation was set. A trade. Nia for the ledger and Kaido's public surrender of his territory. It was to happen at the old Tsukiji fish market, abandoned at midnight, a sprawling maze of concrete and steel. Kaido agreed. His men, his entire organization, believed he was about to sacrifice everything he had built. They saw it as the ultimate dishonor. But Nia saw the truth in his eyes the night before the trade. He was not giving up his empire. He was coming to get her. Everything else was secondary. She was held in a cold, damp storage unit, the air thick with the phantom smell of fish. Tanaka stood before her, a man whose ambition had curdled into a venomous rage. He saw her as a pawn, a piece of flesh to be bartered. He is a fool, Tanaka sneered, to trade a dynasty for a foreign girl. He has grown soft, unworthy of the name Ishikawa. Nia met his gaze, her fear a cold, hard stone in her gut. But her mind was working, observing. She noted the way Tanaka's men deferred to one man in particular, not Tanaka. A younger, wiry man with a nervous tic, a constant flexing of his fingers. He was the real threat, the one with the tactical mind. Tanaka was just the figurehead. The next night, at the market, she was led to the center of a vast, empty hall. Kaido stood alone at the far end, a silhouette against the dim sodium lights. He held a briefcase. The ledger. "The girl first," Tanaka shouted, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Two of Tanaka's men pushed Nia forward. As she walked, her eyes were not on Kaido. They were on the man with the nervous tic. She saw him subtly signal two other men, hidden in the shadows on the catwalks above. The trade was a lie. They were going to kill Kaido as soon as he was in range, and then kill her. She was never meant to be rescued passively. She was halfway across the floor when she acted. She stumbled, her legs seeming to give out from under her. As she fell, she twisted her body, slamming into the legs of the man on her right. He grunted, caught off balance. In that same motion, she kicked out with all her strength, her heel connecting squarely with the knee of the man on her left. He howled and went down. It was a tiny window, a 2-second disruption. But it was all Kaido needed. The world exploded. Kaido dropped the briefcase and drew 2 pistols from inside his coat. Gunfire erupted from the shadows where his own men, the loyal few, had been waiting. The briefcase was a decoy. This was never a trade. It was an execution. In the chaos, Nia scrambled away, not toward Kaido, but toward cover behind a stack of rusted metal crates. Tanaka screamed in rage, his trap sprung. The man with the tic was already firing at Kaido, forcing him back. Nia saw him, the wiry man, reloading, his attention fixed on the main firefight. She saw a heavy chain and hook hanging from a nearby gantry. Adrenaline surged through her, cold and clear. She climbed onto the crates, her movements clumsy but desperate. She grabbed the hook, and with a guttural yell, swung the heavy chain like a pendulum. It slammed into the man's back. He stumbled forward, out of cover, his eyes wide with shock. It was the opening Kaido needed. 2 shots, precise and final. The man dropped. With their tactical leader gone, Tanaka's remaining forces fell into disarray. The fight was over quickly. Kaido's men were efficient, brutal, and absolute. Silence descended, broken only by the drip of water from the high ceiling. Tanaka was on his knees, defeated. Kaido walked toward him, his face a merciless mask. He did not kill him. He spoke a few quiet words, and his men dragged Tanaka away. Death would have been a mercy. Kaido had other plans, debts to be settled in ways that were far worse. Then, Kaido turned to her. He walked across the blood-slicked concrete, his eyes never leaving hers. He stopped in front of her, his suit immaculate despite the chaos. He looked at the chain still clutched in her hand, then at her face, smudged with dirt and lit by a fierce, wild courage. She had not been rescued. She had fought. She had saved him as surely as he had saved her. A cost had been paid. To crush the betrayal, Kaido had been forced to reveal his hand, to burn assets and expose loyalties. His empire was smaller now, leaner, but forged in fire and absolute in its devotion to him. He had paid in territory and treasure. Nia had paid with her innocence. She had crossed into his world, and her hands were not entirely clean. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently take the heavy chain from her grasp and let it fall to the floor with a clang. His acknowledgement of what she was to him was not in words. It was in the reverence of that simple gesture. "Everything I have is built on a code," he said, his voice low in the echoing silence. "Loyalty.
Honor. Death.
You are not part of that code," he paused, his dark eyes holding hers. "You are the reason for it now." The final paragraph, the final choice, came days later. The war was over. Tanaka's faction was dismantled, the traitors erased. The penthouse was quiet again, the silence no longer tense, but settled. The city glittered below, a silent, beautiful beast that had tried to consume them both. Mia stood on the balcony, the cool night air on her face.
She was free.
The doors were unlocked. A passport with a new name and a bank account with an impossible sum of money sat on the table inside. She could walk away, disappear, and build a new life anywhere in the world. He had given her the ultimate gift, a choice. Kaido came to stand beside her.
He did not speak.
He did not ask her to stay. He did not offer promises or declarations. He simply stood there, a pillar of stillness and power, and waited. His presence was a question. She looked out at the endless river of lights, the city that had stolen her old life and given her this strange, dangerous new one. She thought of the girl who had worried about rent, who had flinched at the sight of a tattooed hand. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who had faced down death, who had found a terrifying strength within herself, and who had seen the man behind the monster. She turned away from the view. She turned toward him. She met his unwavering gaze, and in the deep, dark brown of his eyes, she saw her own reflection. She took one small step, closing the final inch of distance between them. It was not a surrender. It was an answer. She stepped into the circle of his power, into the heart of his dangerous world, and claimed her place. She did not say a word. She didn't have to. The choice was made.